1.
Please do so as soon as possible. And note that after we close the portal, we'll be making no exceptions. There'll be no late submissions. So you have until February 7th. Please submit.
Great. And if you need any technical assistance, we can try to provide that. So please reach out well ahead of the deadline the night before. John?
Yes.
Thanks very much, Heather. I don't know if this comes in the category of point of personal privilege, and I only say that because I'm going to say a few words about the Reverend George Chapman, who we learned this week had died at age, I think he was just about to have his 81st birthday. And the reason I mention it's personal is that George was, I'm going to put it this way, my minister. He ministered to me as he ministered to hundreds and hundreds of people from the pulpit and also just his leadership of St. Paul's Church in Brookline, which is, I think, familiar to many. It's a really striking edifice that's on the corner of St. Paul Street in Aspinwall. It wasn't always the church that people see today. George happened to have become the minister at St. Paul's shortly after there was a devastating fire. And it is so emblematic of George's ministry to many of us in Brookline, in St. Paul's congregation, but also in the wider community, that he literally rebuilt a church and a congregation and a community from the ashes of a fire. He was an amazing, amazing person. If people will forgive me, I'm just going to read a little bit from his obituary. I'll try to keep it short, but there is so much to say. But here's from the obituary. It was at St. Paul's, Brookline, that George lived his full calling. When he accepted the position in 1978, the sanctuary was a burned out shell, but the residual congregation was united in the belief that the church had a unique mission. Further on in the obituary, after telling the story of the rebuilding of the church, George loved his ministry, preaching, writing, weekly newsletters, baptizing, marrying and burying, tending to the sick and needy, counseling and leading adults, children, and young adult classes, which together embodied his passions for law, journalism, politics, social work, teaching, and writing. He led intergenerational groups to Honduras to build schools and water systems. He believed strongly in the power of faith, acceptance, and tolerance, and engaged deeply in interfaith collaboration, brought his commitment to justice and equality to projects throughout the community, including leading the development of the Brookline Emergency Food Pantry and a documentary on slavery in Brookline through the Human Relations Youth Resources Hidden Brookline Committee. He was a servant leader both at home and abroad. In Brookline, he was an active member of Brookline Rotary, a longtime supporter of the Teen Center, on the board of the Senior Center, a youth soccer coach, shared his love for performance as a frequent contributor to the annual PTO play. And the obituary contains much more. I urge people to read it. They can find it just by Google searching George Chapman, Brookline. Visiting hours are this Friday at Bell O'Day. The service, a funeral service is at the church, St. Paul's, on Saturday. There will be many, many people there who had occasion in their lifetimes to feel personally healed, both by George's interventions, but also just by his example. An amazing person. And it's really a privilege to be able to say a few words about him on this occasion, although it's a very sad occasion.
It truly is. I got the privilege of knowing him on Rotary. Both Bernard and I are active Rotary members, and he was, I believe, the president of the Brookline chapter when I joined. So it is a real loss for the community.
Mhm.
Miriam, did you have another announcement that you wanted to make?
Yeah. Thank you. First, I just wanted to acknowledge Lunar New Year and say Happy New Year to those who celebrate. And I'm sorry to say on the same breath, I want to acknowledge the mass shootings and how they have affected specifically that community, but all of us. There have been more mass shootings than there are days in January so far this year. And I think that's an alarming statistic. And we have good, strong gun laws in Massachusetts, and I really appreciate that. But I just think it's worth acknowledging the struggle and the pain, and also at the same time, the new year. So I just wanted to put that there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other updates before we go into public comment? Seeing none. John, take it away.
All right, to the public, thank you for joining us for this public comment, an opportunity to hear your perspective on the issues in Brookline that matter to you. Do have a few rules. Each person limited to speaking to 3 minutes. You don't need to use the entire time, but you may if you like. Please refrain from personal attacks and from addressing personnel issues. Members of the public sometimes raise questions. We may get you an immediate answer, but more likely we'll get you an email answer later. We'll let you know if you have 30 seconds remaining and when your time is up. So please conclude your remarks when you hear that signal. If you have more to say, you are welcome to send an email to the select board expressing your thoughts in greater detail. Devin, who is first on our list? Looks like we've got quite a list tonight.
The first person signed up for public comment is Fran Perler. You've been promoted to a panelist, and your 3 minutes will begin when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Marilyn Rosenbaum and myself, Fran Perler, submitted a petition requesting Brookline fully fund the rodent control plan generated by its own departments. We collected over 1,200 signatures and counting in only 6 weeks. That included 59 businesses, Rep. Tommy Vitolo, and 92 town meeting members. The petition includes signatures from every precinct, from residents of Brookline Housing Authority, senior housing, single-family homes, and apartments throughout Brookline. Marilyn and I spoke one-on-one with hundreds of people and around 100 businesses. We rang doorbells, we entered shops, we stood on the street. Their sentiments were unanimous. Brookline needs to do more to address the rodent crisis. Individuals and businesses are doing their part, but the problem is bigger than any single person can tackle. The petition started before we were aware that the town was considering funding the recap through a Proposition 2.5 override. Nearly everyone we spoke with thought that this was just wrong. Nearly everyone said that. Rats are in our homes, cars, parks, yards, streets, and businesses. People are being bitten by rats. They spread numerous diseases via biting, urine, and excrements. They terrify people. They destroy property and significantly reduce the quality of life for residents and businesses alike. The strongly voiced consensus was that the rodent crisis is an essential public health issue that should be funded in the town's primary budget. After all, isn't public health and safety and solid waste management a basic service that every town should provide to all its citizens? Business people felt the same way. Nobody wants to come to a business district where rats are scurrying around. Rats live and breed near food sources, mainly dumpsters and trash barrels. These need to be managed better by using rodent-resistant containers and more frequent pickup when necessary. The recap seeks to eliminate the rat buffets by tightening regulations, providing equipment and personnel to pick up trash on public property, and to hire a person dedicated to rodent issues by improved inspection and enforcement of solid waste management
You have 30 seconds.
regulations. Funding the recap should be mandatory and not rely on the passage of an override. Even a class of 25 third graders got it right. Their petition asked, "Please help us get rats out of our town with rat traps." The following speakers will address the sentiments in the community, the business point of view, and the life in a rodent hotspot. Thank you for your time and attention.
I'd like to note that the next people I have signed up for public comment are Marilyn Rosenbaum and Farzad Gorchi, who I do not see in the attendee list. The next person signed up for comment is Lisa Cody.
Mhm. Can Marilyn be the next speaker?
I don't see Marilyn here or Farzad. So I can return back to them when I see them in the list, but I'm going to go
Okay,
down in
thank
the
you.
order. Lisa, you've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and share your video if you're comfortable. Your 3 minutes will begin.
Should I hit start video?
You can. You have not.
I have not, that's correct. Okay. All right, hi there. My name is Lisa Cody. I live at 12 Kenwood Street. I went door to door with a petition to address the rat infestation and get the signatures of residents on the 4 streets which surround our park. Here is what my neighbors told me. On Verndale Street, one resident told me she sits in her car at night when she gets home from work crying and waiting for a roommate to come home and help her to the door. From her car, she's feeling traumatized, watching rats running along the pathway to the front door, on the porch, and in the yard. She's afraid she will be bitten or attacked. Another resident reported that on Halloween night, while trick-or-treating with her children, her daughter became hysterical at the sight of a rat coming up from inside the candy bucket. When she told her mother checked it out for herself and was horrified to see a rat look up at her and then continued eating the candy. A couple on Russell Street came home to find 6 rats in their kitchen on the counters. They had to keep their puppy on their bed at night to protect it. And in at least 7 other instances, it's been reported that rats were found in people's homes. A resident on Columbia Street came home to find the dishwasher wires chewed out. Several residents had their town-issued garbage cans eaten through. Residents on Kenwood expressed real fear about taking their small dogs out for walks as they regularly see rats, even before sunset, in driveways, yards, and even on the sidewalks. Folks with children at the park see rats running to the garbage bins, crawling inside the bins, running in the large sandbox where children play, and digging under sandbox toys. An 89-year-old neighbor was horrified to find a rat trying to climb out of his toilet. 89 years old, battling rats inside and outside his house. Other neighbors have had car starter wires chewed and windshield fluid tubing eaten through. Yet another couple witnessed a rat climbing out from under the hood of their car while they were driving. Finally, I must share the horrifying story of a delivery person who was bitten by a rat while delivering a package to someone's back door. I have lived in this neighborhood for 36 years, and this is an unprecedented and exponential explosion of rats, which is traumatizing to our neighbors, from our children to the elderly,
You have 30 seconds.
which threatens our property values and is already costly for many of us who are battling rats with private services. This requires a similarly unprecedented response from the town of Brookline, an investment of time, of personnel, and of money. The response has to be as aggressive as the problem. One last thing, I'd like to mention that I collected 77 signatures and emailed it to the director of the Public Health Department with the petition requesting a meeting where we could work together with the department and try and solve the problem. I never heard back. Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is Susan Park. You've been promoted to a panelist. Your 3 minutes will begin when you're ready.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Susan Park. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 17. I'm also on the Brookline Wellness Committee and on the steering board for the study committee after warrant Article 9 was passed. And Brookline has allocated money to do a mitigation study on cannabis and the community, especially on youth. And I'm calling about item number 5 tonight, which is the marijuana establishment equity policy. I read through it and I just want to say that it's one, very confusing. And I'm not quite sure why this policy is being talked about tonight, considering warrant Article 15 passed at the last town meeting. Warrant Article 15 basically put a ballot question asking the town to vote on cannabis retail stores of no more than 4, and it passed. And so I think that this policy could really wait till after the May ballot. Also, I feel like, I'm wondering if this has been looked at through CMAC. It's the town's cannabis committees, CMAC, and then the study committee with the chair is Alok Samani. And when I reached out to both committees, they said that no, they haven't heard about this policy. This policy has not come across their desk. They haven't talked about it as a group. So I'm calling in tonight, asking the select board to really not even discuss this till after the May ballot. And the other thing is about this equity policy, when you look at number 2 under definitions, and it talks about the marijuana establishment, this is what it says: any type of licensed marijuana related business, included but not limited to storefront marijuana retailers. And this is exactly what was in the language for warrant Article 15, that we don't want any more past 4. There's no more than 4. And to include that now, when town meeting has already spoken and said that warrant Article 15 passes, let's let the town vote on this. We want to hear from the town.
You have
It's just
30
really
seconds.
surprising that this equity policy is being discussed. So I'm asking the select board to wait till after the May ballot, and please let the town's CMAC and the study committee look at this before discussing this tonight. Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is Linda Roseman. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can begin.
Thank you, Devin. Good evening, everyone. I'm Linda Roseman, town meeting member, Precinct 14, and former chair of the Police Commissioners Advisory Committee. In the spring of 2020, the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police officers triggered protests across the country. The anti-police sentiment that was engendered as a result was understandable. But was it fair to blame the Brookline Police Department for what happened in Minnesota? At that moment in time, the Brookline Police Department was one of the most respected, well-educated departments in the state. It was a model of community policing. It had become a center and a role model for training other departments in crisis intervention and de-escalation techniques. The department held quarterly stakeholders meetings with mental health workers, juvenile justice advocates, public housing representatives, educators, and others to strengthen community ties and form new ones. When a small vocal group of anti-police advocates took over the narrative, much of this changed. Some members of the select board and a group of town meeting members supported efforts to defund the police. 2 very successful community programs, the SRO and Walk and Talk programs, were eliminated. Chief Lipson not only stepped down, but eventually left town as a result of feeling unsupported and under fire, leaving the position of permanent chief vacant for over 2 years, a situation unheard of in any other department in town, further demoralizing the BPD. Subsequently, the department has seen an unprecedented exodus of valued officers who have gone to work in other cities and towns. Many cite feeling unsupported by town leaders as a factor in their decision to leave. The last search for a permanent chief resulted in disaster, but even before the disaster struck, the well-known intention and predetermined outcome to hire an outside candidate was a slap in the face to a department whose morale was already at an all-time low. The department did not deserve this treatment. They do not deserve it now. I hope this new process to appoint a permanent chief will be a step toward healing the relationship between our town leaders, our public safety officers, and our community at large. Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is Marilyn Rosenbaum. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin.
All right, thank you for allowing me to speak. Over the past month, I've been canvassing Brookline residents along with Fran Perler, who spoke earlier, and talking with them about the rat crisis in our town. The overwhelming response has been one of powerlessness and frustration. They feel the town has not heard them, that they are left on their own to struggle with the stresses, both financial and emotional, of dealing with this very traumatic and impactful problem. Essentially, they are feeling utterly alone and that the powers that be in the town are only giving them lip service. For me, what's been most difficult was to hear from parents whose children were afraid to play in their own yards or playgrounds, to walk their dogs, go trick-or-treating for fear of encountering rats, or who had nightmares because rats had gotten into the walls of their homes and the children could hear them scratching. On one of my canvassing outings, I saw this picture on the entryway of the home. It was a first grader who had drawn a picture of a rat with the caption, "Unwanted rats." And I thought, how sad, because my children at that age were drawing pictures of their puppies, not of rats. Our grassroots group and the residents we represent in this petition are asking for leadership to address this horrible crisis. We know that town departments, especially health and public works, are trying to address this, but they cannot meet the challenges without your support and action. As one parent wrote me, the frustrating part for us is that from what we see, the problem is not improving, but in fact seems to be intensifying. I know the town has taken efforts, but we just aren't seeing any improvement. We would love to see the town as a whole come up with an effective plan that will move the needle up in the right direction on this public health issue. So in summary, what we are asking is for our town leaders to provide true commitment and dedication to do what's necessary to address this very important issue. Thank you very much.
The next person signed up for public comment is Arthur Conquest. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your time will begin.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. My comments are 3 minutes and 15 seconds. I just want to tell you that in advance. If that's okay.
That's fine, Arthur.
Okay, thank you. Last week, I was asked by the acting chair of the Diversity Commission to attend one of their meetings because they'd be discussing Bernard Green's and Marty Rosenthal's warrant Article 31, which was passed at town meeting a month ago. Article 31 substituted mine, warrant Article 24, which 2 years ago had been referred to the Dicker Commission by a vote of town meeting. 12 of the 15 commissioners were present Wednesday evening, several of them for the first time having recently been appointed. 3 were absent. Of the 12 present, every group from the protected class was represented, but Blacks. I followed up the next day and none of the 3 absentees were Blacks. In the whereas clause of warrant Article 30, I filed last town meeting, but then withdrew, was as follows, quote, whereas 8th of February 2022, an email was circulated by the Office of Diversity, Inclusion and Community Relations announcing the publication of a disparity report. It included the names and affiliations of the disparity report working group that oversaw the data collection and writing of the document. What painfully stuck out almost immediately upon opening the first page was the absence of Blacks and Asians from the 8 members who made up the working group which produced the report, especially given the sponsoring agency was Dicker. I don't have figures for Brookline, but let me quote from the state's hate crime website. Quote, hate crime incidents 2020, crimes against persons 204, crimes against property 144, crimes against society 3, bias motivation categories, race and ethnicity 188, religion 69, sexual orientation 51, disabilities 2, gender 2, gender identity 11. What has this community learned from the Gerald Alston decision? Until you admit that the problem of racism is deeply embedded in this community, all of the discussions and the proposed fake initiatives put forth are going to evolve the same way all of the other initiatives that have surfaced
You have
over the
30
past
seconds.
4 decades. Since I've been involved in community activities and events encompassing disillusions of racism have gone. In the face of all the blatant evidence that exists, the ruling power structure very sadly continues to refuse to admit that there is a very serious racism problem in Brookline. No Blacks on the Dicker Commission is by design. Thank you for your attention.
The next person signed up for comment is Richard Strock. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin.
You're on mute. There you go.
Okay, there we go. Hello, Happy New Year to everybody. I've seen you guys a few times over the years. I was here mostly to speak about the policy on equity as it relates to marijuana, but I can't resist saying a word or two about the rats as well, because I would like to second, third, and fourth the motions. Just from personal experience, we have lost about $50,000 or $60,000 of property value as a result of the rats already. We have an outdoor parking space that lives next door to a dumpster, and it's effectively unusable at this point. And we're paying another $3,000 a year now for garage parking. Not maybe as bad as some of the stories I've heard, and I don't envy the town this job, because I am not exactly sure how one deals with this. I will share a couple things that we learned along the way to the extent it's useful, and that is one mom and dad produce about 1,200 rats a year. I think with those kind of numbers, I don't quite know how you attack that. One of the maybe the most attractive propositions is some birth control has been shown to be effective in leaving food sources, but honestly, I think this is a COVID-esque type challenge of whack-a-mole. So I hear people's concerns, but at the same time, I am not sure. We are all under siege, and I think it's a new reality. So, but I am certainly feeling the pain along with everyone else, and would be remiss if I didn't put a word or two in there, I think. What I really want to speak about, though, tonight is the question 5 that's under discussion. And I wish I understand this is not really a Q&A session, and I will ask for a little latitude here, because I found out about this very last minute, so I'm not fully oriented. But on the surface, I have some concerns. If I understand correctly, you folks are talking about equity. At this stage, what you're talking about is equity policy as it relates to licensing, which was something that was hotly discussed about 1.5 years ago. And I concede is an issue that needs to be dealt with. At the time, that was piggybacked on an attempt under Warrant Article 7 to add 2 new equity licenses on top of what existed. And so I think there are 2 issues here, and we need to keep them separate. One is the number of licenses. The other is the equity orientation to licensing. To be clear, I'm all in favor of equity initiatives. What concerns me here is that at the time that was considered, that initiative was referred to a moderators committee. And again, I'm not a town government wonk, so apologies if I get some of this wrong. And so that my understanding was that some very well-heeled professionals are in the process of trying to pick apart what does equity policy look like. So I'm having a hard time understanding why, and again, my understanding, and I just found out about this today, literally, but my understanding is that this has not been put before CMAC or done in conjunction with the moderators committee or in collaboration with them. And so while I don't exactly understand the context of this, I'm concerned about why the board is taking up this issue ahead of what I believe is a deadline for them to report in. There's a second issue here.
You have 30 seconds.
Okay, and I guess the second issue here as well is this. I understand that recently there was another liquor license authorized, which would, in theory, open up the select board to being able to issue another retail license. As we all know, warrant Article 15 this year asked the community to decide whether or not they want more marijuana in this town. And I would hope that there would be no action. I don't know if this is bundled with that at all, but I would hope there would be no action in that direction until we had a chance to hear from the voters, just out of respect for the democratic process in this town. And that is the extent of my comments tonight.
The next person signed up for comment is Yuri Mariash. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I hope you can hear me. I'm walking outside after picking up the kids from daycare. But just, I'll keep it brief. And all I wanted to say is, as a town meeting member for Precinct 17, I'd really like us to respect the decision that we have reached at during the last town meeting, which was to let the voters decide. And so that's essentially, my ask is to respect the process and the decision that we made as town meeting members to kind of let the voters decide on this one. So that's it. I don't need my entire 2 minutes. Thank you all.
The next person signed up for comment is Kate Silba. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin.
Can you hear me?
We can.
I'm Kate Silba, town meeting member from Precinct 1, and I also want to speak about item 5. I want to go back one town meeting discussion further back than the November 21 one. In 2019, with the STM3, we proposed, I was a sponsor, we proposed a moderators committee to consider how to encourage equity in this industry. This was a little earlier than a lot of the discussion was happening townwide, but that was in our warrant. The select board said, we don't want it to be a moderators committee to consider the equity policy. We'd like it to be a select board committee, the licensing review committee. They won that vote. Town meeting voted to have it be a select board committee, and then select board never convened that committee for reasons to do with the pandemic. That's 2019. In 2021, this came back in the form of the warrant Article 7 referral. And again, the question in some depth that we discussed, which is not everybody's intention around equity, because I know that the select board and town meeting has good intentionality around this equity point, but around certainly wanting any additional shops or recycled licenses to be genuine equity licenses. But there's a real problem in the law about whether or not we can make that happen. And this was all what we discussed in 2021. And this time, because the 2019 Select Board Committee had not been convened to study equity, even though it had been voted, town meeting voted to make it a moderators committee. And their charge was to figure out how to deal with the incredibly problematic framing that Massachusetts has done around the social equity applicant definitions, and figure out whether or not they could recommend to you a policy after studying all kinds of different ways that we could manage to improve equity. That happened. That committee is staffed with serious volunteers. It is not kind of a dead committee the way the earlier one was, or the way some committees are. It's actively meeting. It's held hearings. They have very serious people on that committee, and they are charged with making a recommendation to you about this. So in those two things alone, just say to me that you guys need to wait on this social equity. In addition, it is also on adopting a policy. It is also true that because of the vote that just happened, if you were to proceed with trying to issue that 5th license now I'm not saying that you lack the power to do it, simply that it would be an odd thing to do in the shadow of the voters being queued up to weigh in on it appropriately. It would be sort of like, Trump was allowed to appoint Amy Coney Barrett moments before the election, but none of us thought it was particularly a good thing that he did. And I also just want to say that I'm happy if anyone wants to spend more time drilling down on why the policy that you guys are considering tonight, if you go ahead and consider it, which I think you shouldn't, isn't effective.
You have 30 seconds.
In particular, with the time left, let me just say the categories that in the state language that you're using, the social equity category, they were not adopted to be licensing programs. They were adopted to be a snapshot about an individual in time to offer a particular benefit, right? Like reduction in licensing fees or a sped up review process. That's not meaning that they're bad categories. It's just that they work for that because they're a snapshot in time, and you can determine whether somebody is or is not a social equity applicant. But what they don't do is work for ownership over time and the monitoring of capital structures and the monitoring of transfers. And it's not simply that whether we have good or bad intentions about that, we're just not able as a town. We don't have the authority. We don't have the power. We can't get the information.
You've reached 3 minutes.
So, I for a lot of reasons, both on the merits of the thing you're about to do and for the process reasons, I really think you guys should not be doing this tonight.
The next person signed up for public comment is John Lau. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your time will begin.
Good evening and happy Lunar New Year to everybody. It's Year of the Rabbit, so blessings to everyone's families and good health. I just want to say thank you to the select board for bringing up the topic of social equity cannabis licenses. As everyone knows, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts requires that communities that do welcome cannabis retail shops in their municipality is required to have 20% of all package stores or their available number of licenses. So that's just what the Commonwealth says. So I look forward to these future discussions, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
The next person signed up for comment is Danelle O'Neill. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin.
Good evening, everyone. Heather, John, may I have 3 minutes and like 15 seconds? Because I do want to talk about a couple of things, please.
Of course.
Thank you. So first and foremost, rest in peace to George Chaplin. He was a blessing to everybody in this community, including myself. So many words that you just can't even say about that man. Number two, I hope everyone has gone to go see the Embrace in the Commons. It's important that folks go and see and feel that monument. Hopefully you can get the feeling of inclusion and being included in this time and year, and just remembrance of all the sacrifices folks have made for people of color, just humans, period, to be human and show humanity and love for one another. So please go see that monument. Go see the embrace, please. February is around the corner, and for the last couple of years, the select board has been gracious enough to acknowledge Brookline's enslaved. So I hope and I would like to see that continues this year as well, that we do acknowledge the enslaved and read their names. The first select board meeting in February, I think it's on the 7th. Now, down to the agenda item, the marijuana, social equity. So in regards to social equity, first of all, thank you for putting this on the agenda, because it is necessary. By state law, it is necessary that we have a solid social equity policy that lines up with the state. What folks are forgetting, and let me, before I go further, Facebook is something funny, huh? Facebook is funny, your memories. One of my memories on Facebook showed up today from 5 years ago today. 5 years ago today, the CCC had their equity cannabis meeting, okay? I attended that. Boston had their social equity cannabis meeting. I attended that. Brookline, we had our own discussion on cannabis that same day, and I attended that as well. It's 5 years ago, 2018. So in regards to May, this campaign for or against the marijuana, the retail stores, we regardless have to have a policy by state law. And it bothers me that folks are upset that the select board is doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing by having that in place. People are forgetting the health department. Thank you, Devin. The health department approved social consumption. They didn't approve retail, but they approved social consumption. And that's right around the corner. That's coming. So that there needs to be a policy in place in regards to social equity, and that's another license. So this is all necessary. So I just want to say thank you, and please have that discussion tonight, because you have to have that discussion tonight. It's necessary. All right, I won't take up any more of your time. I'll see you at the next meeting. Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is John Harris. You've been promoted.
Yes, hi, thank you. John Harris, town meeting member, precinct 8. Speaking in support of the petition urging robust funding of Brookline's rodent control program. Precinct 8 has been reeling for a few years now from the rat invasion. Mostly, I think, because of our many hotspots, which, by the way, seem to be primarily dumpster buildings rather than blue and black bin buildings. Our southern border is Harvard Street at JFK Crossing with its restaurants, and our northern border abuts Commonwealth Avenue from Winslow Street to Packard's Corner with its restaurants and apartment complexes. In addition, several apartment complexes and construction sites throughout the precinct also serve as hotspots. Again, primarily, but certainly not solely, dumpster buildings rather than black and blue bin buildings. Several months ago, constituents approached me and my fellow town meeting members to alert us that their lots and homes were under invasion, and you've heard a little bit about that from previous speakers. Now, as the 1,200 petition signatures indicate, rats are an acute problem town-wide. Everyone in town owe a great thanks to Fran Perler and Marilyn Rosenbaum for their diligent work mobilizing first their neighbors and then the entire town to the issue. 1,200 signatures with the potential to garner many more if necessary. This is by far the greatest participation in a town-based political campaign in the 30 years that I have lived in Brookline. It's especially amazing when you realize they ramped up their signature campaign in December, when most of the Brookline 500 were exhausted from a prolonged town meeting and then busy preparing for the holidays. I hope to impress upon you the importance of robust funding of rodent control, whether or not the override passes, because rodent control is a fundamental public health imperative. Again, 1,200 signatures and counting. After speaking with Fran in Maryland and several others in Precinct 8, I can assure everyone that this campaign will not let up until there is a massive reduction in the rat population in Brookline. Thank you.
Next person signed up for public comment is Carolyn Thal. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Did you just call me Devin?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I stepped away for a minute. Carolyn Thal, town meeting member, precinct 16. Sorry, forgive me. I'm trying to multitask. Little bit embarrassing. I'm sorry to have to be here to talk about Hancock Village again. It's not on the agenda. And it is not about the pudding stone matter that we've been talking about. We've spent many hours so far discussing changes that Chestnut Hill Realty has requested on the Pudding Stone project, which reminds us and underscores how important it is to do things by the book on 40B and of course any building projects, and in a manner that's respectful to the needs and experiences of residents. At the other 40B project within the general Hancock Village area, residences of South Brookline or ROSB, there's been an ongoing issue with trash management. And it's come to my attention recently that at the root of the problem, the property owner is in violation of the comprehensive permit for their 40B because they removed the trash facility that was part of the approved site plan and that was outlined in the comprehensive permit conditions. Removing this facility means that residents have to walk up to half a mile to deposit trash in a facility available on what is actually a separate property or drive if they have a car. That's ludicrous. And no public health official could, in their professional capacity or within the bounds of reason, approve that. That is basically like carrying your trash from Town Hall to Coolidge Corner and back. It appears that the facility removal, the trash facility removal, was done with the blessing of town staff, even though no town department or staff has authority to modify a clearly articulated condition of a 40B permit or to approve a physical and functional change to the site plan. Unfortunately, I have not yet received acknowledgement from town staff that this violation was made, is ongoing, and needs to be rectified in order for there to be a reasonable trash management system for the residents of the ROSB property, and also so the project gets back into compliance. I'm afraid that as the town has taken on these complex projects, it has struggled to keep up with the complex task of overseeing the permits and conditions.
You have 30 seconds.
As these do touch on various departments, but it's the town's job to ensure compliance. I'm not here to ask anything of the select board tonight, but I am here to say publicly and for the record, CHR is seriously out of compliance on ROSB on an important matter. They made a change to the site plan without ZBA approval. They've been in violation for over 3 months. And I would love to get some help with this from the people who are meant to help. Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is Aon Wang. You've been promoted to a panelist. Your time will begin.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is A1 Wang, town meeting member, precinct 8. Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, so since our last town meeting, the warrant article 15 has been passed. So we will already decide to let the town determine how many cannabis stores we have, right? Now, I already informed my constituents about the ballot questions for no more than 4 cannabis stores. They are all want to have their voice to be heard. Now, the policy item number 5 is potentially conflict with the decision voted by town meeting members in the coming May. So like, for example, for the social equity policy, it should be, if there's a no more than 4 is passed, how do we make a decision based on that? Should we remove another store from the existing store to accommodate the social equity store, or something like that? So there's a lot of more complicated questions need to be asked and to make a decision based on that. So right now it is not a good timing. Just like a few months later, you will have a more idea about how the town weighted in for more information, and you can make a better decision to accommodate both the social equity and also like for all the town's voice on the ballot questions. Yeah, so consider this one. I hope you guys can consider to do that and delay the discussion for the later date. Thank you so much.
The next person signed up for public comment is Michael Erwig. You've been promoted to a panelist. Your 3 minutes will begin when you're ready.
Great. Thank you very much and good evening, everybody. I moved to Brookline about 3 years ago, and prior to moving here, I lived in Washington, D.C., where there was also a huge rodent problem. And one thing that I learned there, as I lived next to a slumlord building, is that the only way to change behavior was when the city would fine that building for their trash violations with their trash canisters and their dumpsters. So I think that's an important aspect of the strategy here for the town is to fine establishments, businesses, or condo buildings or apartment buildings that are in violation of the trash policies. And I'm not sure if one exists, but I'd like to see a website where we can see this tracked. So for example, I can go and see, okay, the Bruegger's Bagel on Harvard Street, okay, they've been fined 0 times or 5 times. And I think it's just escalating the fine so that your first violation is something and your second is even more and your third is even more. And I think when you start hitting people in the pocketbooks, that's the only way to kind of get them to change behavior. Thank you very much. If you're interested in reaching out to me, it's Michael Erwig, Michael, irwig@gmail.com. Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is Wadner OG. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your time will begin.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Wadner Oje. I am a town meeting member for Precinct 15. I'm here tonight to speak on item number 5. I strongly urge the board to no action on this item for several reasons. Article 15 was passed by the town meeting members back in November, and also there is a potential for conflict between the legislative body and the executive. As a democratic society, the executive has to respect the legislative body. Also, the legislative body has to respect the executive branch. There's a potential for conflict if the board were to move forward with that policy and may the voter approve Article 15, and the board, if they move now, they issue a license, the 5th license, and Article 15 say no more than 4. There will be a conflict, and that will create some legal issues because ultimately,
you have 30 seconds.
Article 15 will override the board authority because it's just a policy. So I want you, the board to think about that. Let's take a wait and see approach tonight. Wait until after the voters speak on this issue to take that. It is very important. I'm all for equity, but at the same time, let the voter decide. Thank you.
I'm promoting Paul Warren. The next person signed up for public comment is Paul Warren. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin.
Hi, good evening. Paul Warren, town meeting member for Precinct 1 and also a candidate for the select board. I wasn't going to speak on this issue, but I wanted to see if I could help bring some clarity to the many comments on item number 5. there are two things being discussed tonight, and I think they're being conflated. First is the issue of the equity policy and the requirement for an equity policy. Certainly, we do need to have one. The second issue is, which is being confused and conflated, is the possibility of an additional license being issued. I don't believe this evening on the agenda there's any discussion about an additional license. That doesn't seem to be the issue at hand. The issue at hand is the specific equity policy, and there are two committees. I think town meeting member Kate Silbaugh mentioned one, which was a moderators committee that was appointed to address this specific issue. And also CMAC, which is a committee appointed by this committee, the select board, to advise it on policies around mitigation. So I'm really surprised that Alok Samani is not here this evening. He's the chair of the committee for the moderators committee, which was charged with addressing this specific issue. And I'm not sure why that happened. It appears that perhaps there was some miscommunication with respect to the agenda item and some consulting and advice from the two committees that have been appointed to address this issue. And I think that's confusing everybody. I would hope that perhaps the board is just a little bit of ahead of these other committees with respect to a consultation. And I'm wondering if perhaps maybe tabling this until such time that the chair, Alok Samani of the Moderators Committee, and perhaps CMAC could be consulted on the policy that's being put forward to provide feedback, to give the board more important information from these two bodies that have been appointed to help advise it. So I guess my request tonight is, if possible, given this feedback, it might be in the best interest of the board to table this discussion until such time that those two committees could be consulted. Thank you.
At this time, there are 26 attendees. No one is using the hand raise or Q&A feature to indicate they'd like to make a comment.
Thank you, Devin. Chaz, would you like to make a comment or a statement?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And thanks to the various members of the community who have spoken tonight about the rodent control action plan petition that's been submitted. I want to give particular thanks to Fran Perler and Marilyn Rosenbaum. Fran came by the select board office this afternoon and delivered a physical copy of the petition, which is on my desk. I greatly appreciate the community outreach and community effort at addressing this community problem. It is a community problem that requires a real multi-pronged solution. As we said when we initiated this rodent control action plan in October, there is no magic bullet here. It's going to take community engagement and many different avenues to bring the rodent population into basically to heal. I want to tell folks what we have been doing so far and the progress we've made. And again, as many of the folks who signed the petition indicated, the work by both the Health Department and the Department of Public Works has just been above and beyond. Real credit to Sigal and Aaron, who run those departments, for their efforts. The smart traps that were referenced in the initial phase of that rodent control action plan are out and catching rodents. We're already getting a good sense, even in this relatively dormant period, of where high activity areas are. It will be important for us to target those areas as we head into spring. We also rely on your reports to Brook Online to have an ability to figure out where we need to go next. As a couple of people have pointed out, when rodents leave one area, their progeny may wind up in another area that's more suitable for them. And so we need to have that real-time data that comes not just from traps, but from you. So using Brook Online to report is very important for us. So we really appreciate you continuing to do that. We have our health consultant on board. They are in the field looking at recommendations for more sanitary streets come spring, not just outdoor dining, but trash disposal, commercial disposal, all of those things, recommendations that businesses and individuals can use. Our community outreach and education is ramping up. We're going to go door to door. We have door hangers. It's going to be a real community education process. to a point that one commentator made about the use of fines and the use of penalties. As I think many of you know, there's always an issue in localities, and that the maximum fine we can levy as a locality is $300. But our creative team, including our town council's office, is looking into how to best utilize state law that has a higher maximum penalty for things like public nuisances, to ensure that the worst offenders are brought under control with fines on not just a per incident basis, but on a daily basis until the problem is solved. So we are working to make sure that we are in line with the state's requirements for nuisance laws and then pursuing those vigorously. We are also considering how to use a potential increase in solid waste fees to defray the cost of that longer control or rodent action plan. That is one source of funds that we are using that is not additional taxpayer dollars. We are committed as a staff to finding creative ways to finance solutions to these problems. But I will say that as we come into this budget season, I think people will be not humbled, but perhaps it's difficult to find the right word to understand that even in a community like ours, to have an operating deficit at the outset of the budgeting process that we must account for, which requires cutting municipal services, finding opportunities to cut municipal services when we already have such low discretionary spending in the absence of alternatives is going to be a very difficult process. We are already there. And the request to think through, well, what else can you cut? It's very difficult. The question back to the community is, what do you value? I understand the petitioners have this clear value of this as a core service, and we respect that. And we are looking for creative solutions here to finance this in the long term, including additional American Rescue Plan Act funds, including solid waste fees. Wherever we can find money, we are getting that money. But this is a difficult budget season for the town of Brookline. We are still not back where we were pre-pandemic. In many cases, because of the realities of the economy, not just inflation, but things like marijuana tax. We're not the only game in town anymore. Parking fees with people working from home, people not utilizing the lots as much. We won't be back to where we were. And we really will need to consider how, as a community, we finance the things that we care about. And so I am committed, and I know the select board is committed and has charged me with finding out creative solutions to this problem that do not solely say, well, we're just going to look for an override. And I look forward, as the budget process continues, to presenting those creative solutions to the broader community with the understanding that what the community wants is a truly cutting edge, equitable, and well-run community. And then figuring out what the cost of that is and how it will be paid for. So thank you all for your efforts. Thank you especially to those of you who have been providing assistance and guidance and recommendations to town staff about this issue. We are committed to solving this problem with you, and you are partners in this. So thank you very much for all the work that you are doing. I look forward to continuing that work with you as we turn into spring.
Thank you, Chaz. Any comments from select board members before I move into miscellaneous? John? And then Bernard?
Thanks very much. I listened with great interest to all the speakers on all of the topics tonight. And it's interesting, in some recent weeks, there haven't been that many people showing up to speak to the select board about their concerns. And I really appreciate when we have this many people speaking this effectively and passionately about important issues in the community that need to be addressed. So I hope that tonight maybe sets an example. I don't want to, I hope I never regret saying bring it on, but no, this is good. This is healthy. And I want to actually note the town administrator's comments just now on community solution. We have to do more about the rodent problem. No question about it. But no problem. It's going to be it's going to be successful if we as a community mobilize. Perfect examples. Chaz mentioned reporting. I think some people feel like the rat problem has been around for so long now, and we've heard so much about it that it doesn't really pay to report, but it does. It really does. And the problem tends to move around from neighborhood to neighborhood. We need to know where the hot spots are. And that's part of the community response. At some risk of opening a door to something that is not easily solved, we need to do a better job of policing the placing of trash, on the curb by people outside the limits of what are the legal limits of when you're supposed to put your trash out. I think part of the rat problem is there are instances in certain places by certain building owners of trash being put on the curb for too many hours. It becomes an attractant to rodents. And yet we haven't yet quite figured out the solution. But I think as a community, we can figure out how to better police the enforcement of those regulations so that people who do that will get hit hard with a fine and will stop doing it. But right now we're still working on that, but I hope we'll work on it as a community. One thing, and quickly on the other issue, the issue of a social equity policy, an equity policy vis-a-vis cannabis. I do think that some good questions have been raised clearly. However, I don't think that we should confuse having a policy in this area with issuing a license. Yes, we do have some uncertainty about what our next step towards licensing will be because of the action taken by town meeting. But we nonetheless still have an obligation, as Danelle pointed out, and as John Lau pointed out, and others might have pointed out, we do have an obligation to have a policy that should there ever be the opportunity for there to be a social equity license in Brookline, we have a policy for addressing that. And to simply not have a policy at this point is in effect saying, we don't believe we have any future obligation for there to be social equity licensing in Brookline. I'm not saying we've got the policy right down to the dotted I's and the crossed T's with what's before us tonight. But let's at least agree that if we find any fault with what's before us tonight, our next step will be to improve on what's before us tonight. But our next step can't be to just delay and delay and delay having a social equity policy. Thank you for indulging a little bit too much time I took on making some remarks, but thank you.
I mean, keep in mind that we are going to be talking about the social equity policy when we finally get there in the agenda.
I hear you.
Bernard, you're muted.
Yes, Heather, I will say nothing about social equity policy yet, right now. I think the town administrator very well put it. There is no silver bullet to a problem like this. To the extent that we have a way to address the problem of rats, there are costs, sort of like the Pied Piper of Hamlet, who was able to get rid of rats, but at a cost. We have a plan, and while I think that it's very appropriate, and matter of fact, I urge people to continue putting the pressure on the select board and the town, please do it with the understanding that we are working really hard, and there is no magic way that we can solve this problem other than to work harder and harder and harder. And to the extent that people see ways in which we're not doing something that's probably the best approach, they should let us know. And as town administrator mentioned, Brookline Online is where you can tell us about where the rat problem is particularly intense, and please make sure that you take advantage of that. But, you know, we're all committed to addressing this problem, which is a national problem, probably a worldwide problem. But, you know, still in our community, we don't want it. And we need to do the best we can and more to eradicate the problems.
Any other comments before we move into the miscellaneous? Seeing none, we will move to the meeting minutes of our last meeting, January 17th. Any comments about those? Seeing none, I will move approval of the meeting minutes from our meeting on January 17th, 2023. Oh,
I have
Mary.
one that- Yeah, sorry. Under announcements and updates, it says the ARPA committee is on the 7th round of disbursements. It should be the 2nd round of disbursements.
Ah, okay.
That's it.
We will make sure that that change is incorporated.
Thank you.
So with that slight change, all those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from January 17th? All those in favor, Bernard,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Miriam,
Nori and I say aye.
Mike,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye.
You say aye.
The rest of the miscellaneous, I will move approval of the authorization to hire request from the Recreation Department for an assistant rec leader, aquatic supervisor. I will also move approval of the following change orders from Gilbane Building Company related to the Driscoll School project. Change order number 21, increase $18,366. Owner requested changes to bathroom wall tile to facilitate maintenance and provide added colored tile. Change order number 22, increase $30,223. Various additions and deletions to scope of work as described in the summary pages and the architect's explanation of the changes in question. Approving change order number 7 with Lambrian Construction in the amount of $129,936 for added scope to the project as described in the reference documents. Move approval of change order number 3 with Thompson Waterproofing in the amount of $19,465.79 for added scope of to fire station number 4 as part of the building envelope repairs to 5 buildings project. And finally, awarding and executing a contract with Mountain View Landscapes and Lawn Care Incorporated in the amount of $1,389,300 for the renovation of Margaret E. Robinson Playground. All those in favor? Oh, John and Bernard have their hands raised. Okay.
I think Bernard was first.
Okay, I'll be very quick. I'm not asking that this be a condition to item 3F, but I just would like to ask for someone to let us know whether the playground equipment is designed to enable children with handicaps to use it along with other children. You know, we've done that with some of our playgrounds. I just want to alert people to the fact that this is an important issue, and hopefully it was done here. But I would like to know.
I actually flipped through the doorstop of the contract that is currently on my desk, and I believe the answer to that question is yes, but I will confirm and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Great.
I forget the landscape architect that we usually go with, but they have been wonderful on that issue. John?
I just lowered my hand because I no longer have a question.
Okay. So all those in favor of the miscellaneous consent agenda, please say aye. Bernard?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Miriam?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. So now to the main course of our meeting tonight, the social equity policy. A lot was said in public comment, and we don't tend to respond. I found that particularly frustrating this evening because I heard a lot of not entirely accurate information. So why don't we hear from staff as to what exactly this policy is supposed to address and whether or not this is adding another license or violating warrant Article 15.
So with me are members of Town Council's office, in fact, Town Council Joe Callanan and John Moreshi. Just to give a brief overview of the need for this and the decision to bring it here now. And in December, with the approval of an additional package store license, a fifth license did spring into being. A fifth recreational marijuana license, retailer license did in fact spring into being. Historically, the town has not had a social equity policy of any kind regarding this. It has really been first come, first serve. In the past, when those discussions were hypothetical about, in the future, what might the select board do, we've heard from the select board a clear desire to have a social equity policy in place so that during the pendency of a live license, that policy can provide a layer of guidance to applicants and also ensure that some level of social equity protections are in place so that the town's priorities on issuing licenses in a socially equitable way, as well as compliance with state law, is maintained. All of that is a legalese kind of way of saying it's no longer a hypothetical question, right? You do have a license that exists. You were not talking about issuing that license tonight. There is no applicant for that license, but the select board office has received questions. Does a license exist? The response we've given to people who have asked that question is yes, a license exists. However, there may be action in May regarding a ballot question that caps the total number of licenses at 4. So the advice that we have given to potential people who are interested in that license is wait, hold off, see what the town wants to do and respect the town's democratic process on that. With that said, because the license exists and because there are entities out there who are large and who may be willing to take the bet on applying under a first come, first serve regime in the event that the town decides not to cap the number of licenses, it became important, I think, for members of the select board to see a social equity policy in place so that in the event that applicants come in during this period leading up to May, there is something in place indicating the priorities of Brookline. And I know that John and Joe, have been excellent in thinking through this process and developing a clear, streamlined policy that can obviously be updated at a later date and refined accordingly if indeed this issue continues to be a live issue. I would note too, just in passing, that the policy would, even if the town caps the number of licenses at 4, if one of the current licensees goes out of business or leaves the town and the license becomes available again, then the same issue arises. So this is not a matter of priming or preparing the way for the issuing of an additional license. This is just a matter of prudence during this period leading up to May to ensure that the town's social equity policies are in place. John, do you want to just maybe add on to that and talk about the content of the document?
Sure. Briefly, it largely tracks the social equity policy that the town adopted in 2021, which was tied to 2 potential licenses that were not approved by town meeting. So in effect, it is largely the policy that was adopted before, just would apply broadly to any additional license, a fifth license, or other licenses that come up. As I think was mentioned earlier, the marijuana establishments is broad, includes delivery operators, social consumption, marijuana retailers, etc. And other than that, well, I should note it's tied to the CCC's economic empowerment status and the social equity status, which was also alluded to. That was the case in 2021. I think it makes sense to rely on the CCC. They're going to be issuing regs that touch on the minimum standards that will be required for an equity policy for a municipality. They haven't done that. I don't expect that they'll do that before we're supposed to have our initial policy in place. So that's largely it. Chaz, if there's anything else I could say, please let me know.
Thanks, John.
I do see Miriam has her hand up.
So oddly, I think I helped craft this policy. I was, I believe, the select board representative for CMAC at the time. And Melissa can help me out with the name of, we still actually had someone working as the CMAC liaison. Melissa, you know who it was. I cannot remember her name. Very competent woman. And who was it?
Monique Baldwin.
Yes, Monique Baldwin. So Monique crafted this with my guidance, and it was discussed at CMAC, I'm almost sure. So it was several years ago, but this was in fact in front of the CMAC committee at one point. I just want to point that out. And when I went to look at the packet and see what it was, I was like, oh, wait, I know this. The second point I want to make, because several people brought up Alok Samani, who is chairing the moderators committee. And when we were discussing warrant article 15, I had filed a motion to refer warrant article 15 to his moderators committee. And he wrote to me and Heather and Kate and Sandy and Melissa and Bernard and Mike a very thoughtful email, which resulted in me pulling the referral. But I need to quote from it, because he says quite clearly that committee is not going to consider the number of licenses as part of our work. And then he goes on to outline 5 points about why, and then he reiterates that that committee is not, in fact, the committee to make decisions regarding licenses. So he's, at least to me, he made a compelling argument, and I moved the referral. But I think it applies here. First of all, we're not discussing more licenses, but how and what and with, if and when about licenses is not the purveyance of this committee. Is that a word, purveyance? It's not the purvey of this committee. And I think that's clear. So I don't have any problem discussing this. I think this is something we need to do. It applies to transfer of licenses. So I think that's it. I'm done. Thank you.
Let's hear from Mike Salmon, since he is the chair of the CMAC committee.
Thanks, Heather. Miriam just gave me a piece of information that I didn't really have, which is that CMAC had a chance to look at this a few years ago, apparently. Nonetheless, I think it's appropriate to bring it back. CMAC has changed a little bit. It's, for one thing, the sort of the marijuana scene has been calm. CMAC has, I think, we've sort of reached an equilibrium with the amount of business that's going, and the way that customers in each of the stores are being handled. And I think that CMAC might have a little bit different view than they had before. And I absolutely understand that we need to have a policy. And I think it's important to point out that, first of all, I have to say I'm mystified as to why proponents of putting a cap on 4 licenses want to create a monopoly for the existing operators. But I'll leave that to their economic advisors. But we also are likely to have applications for social consumption sites, the functional equivalent of a marijuana bar room. And we need to have a policy for that as well. So it's certainly appropriate to have a policy, and I think it's also appropriate to bring it to CMAC before we act on it.
Bernard, and then John.
Yeah, boy, this is way more complex than the 3 minutes I'm going to try to squeeze it into. Yeah, I agree with Mike that CMAC, but also the moderators committee should have a chance to review this issue and give us their insight. I mean, things have changed, and I don't think that there is a real rush or need to rush to get a policy in place. Let's see. I mean, I think that, there are so many issues that the policy has presented to us doesn't address, that, we need to sort of step back and get it a little better drafted. It doesn't really give a sense of, or it doesn't really make good reference to the real purpose, or one of the purposes of the original marijuana statute or state law, which is to provide some type of benefit to the disproportionately impacted communities, mainly Black and Brown communities that were impacted by the war on drugs. And if you read the social equity program and the other program that the Cannabis Control Commission has, the Certified Economic Empowerment Priority Program, they really don't ensure that the people benefiting from these programs in terms of ownership of businesses are going to be Black and Hispanic individuals or communities. And my concern is that, you know, the system as we're setting it up can be easily gamed. And I think that you know, needs to be looked at. And, you know, one of these committees or both would be the groups to actually do that. Now, you may recall, it may have been a year ago, or it may have been just 9 months ago or 6 months ago. We raised this issue with a number of the applicants with respect to employment and ownership of their businesses. And we were a little bit successful in getting them to, you know, be honest and open about the numbers of Black and Brown people in particular who were employed, but also their efforts, or we actually pressed them to create efforts to bring those individuals into ownership of their businesses. Now, you know, I don't think that, you know, that's a panacea, but it's a start that was very important. And I think that that is something that needs to be incorporated into our equity policy. It's not just, you know, businesses that are completely owned by Black or Brown individuals, but ownership interest in the existing cannabis establishments. You know, we talked about that before. We were successful, I think, to some degree, and I think that that's another thing that needs to be part of our program. But at any rate, that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Bernard. John, you're muted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. So glad to hear these comments, and I'm glad to hear Mike express willingness in taking this up with the CMAQ, and in so doing, you know, I fully expect that among other things, CMAQ will take under consideration some of the questions Bernard has raised, which are good questions. But as I said before, I don't. The one thing I would find unacceptable is if this simply became a means of deferring and deferring and deferring, and essentially doing to non-white applicants what has been done to them up to this point, which is to, you know, shut them out of the game. You know, if anybody deserves an opportunity in this area, it's the applicants that we are talking about who would be enabled to have operating businesses in Brookline under the provisions of this social equity policy, which I'm just going to read one small part of it so that people understand the importance of this. First of all, it defines, you know, what a marijuana establishment is, and as Bernard has pointed out, that's not just a retailer. It's delivery operators, it's social consumption, it's couriers. Second of all, it defines what an equity applicant is, and that's very clear, and it's under the control of the CCC, the Cannabis Control Commission. They have an economic empowerment status category, and they have a social equity status, and they haven't hit the nail on the head squarely with their drafting of these categories, but they went back to work, and as far as I know, they may have it just about where we want it right now. And here's the key part. The purpose of this policy is to provide opportunities for local and diverse applicants for select board marijuana establishment licenses who wish to establish a marijuana establishment within the town of Brookline. Furthermore, this policy establishes the procedures, and then it goes on to say that the effect of this policy will be that there will not be additional licenses granted except to equity applicants. And that's the key part. So people who are concerned about putting a cap on licenses ought to take some comfort in knowing that there's not going to be any more licenses if this policy is in effect, except to equity applicants. I think that's a pretty good policy because we haven't done right by equity applicants. So that would get it right. And now just a question, if I may. I wonder if we could get comment from our town council or from Chaz, whatever he thinks is appropriate, on actually the status of this question of whether under the action taken by town meeting, is it clear that the next thing to do is to put the question on the ballot, given that state statute, actually, the language of the statute is that it is up to the select board to write the question that goes on the ballot before there is action by town meeting. And for whatever reasons, we may have got it backwards in town meeting taking the vote before the select board had written the question to go on the ballot.
We actually looked into this. Joe, you want to summarize?
Sure. So first, I just want to say John Mareshi and Jonathan Simpson are taking kind of the lead on cannabis issues. I'm just here on the usual, hanging out with you guys every Tuesday night. But this is an issue that Jonathan and I dealt with during the spring town meeting. I'm sorry, during the last town meeting, and we looked into it. And no, there's not a way to kind of do it once, or there's only one way of doing it. You can do it the way we've done it or other ways. That being said, even though the town meeting has taken this vote, the select board does have to put the question on the ballot in March. So there would have to be a future vote of the select board to put the question on the May ballot.
Did you mean to say May on the ballot in May?
Yes, but we typically vote the language that will be on the May ballot in March.
So the vote in March.
Right, it's got to be by mid-March.
Okay, I just wasn't.
Second week in March.
Yeah, it took me a second too.
Sorry, we've been going through kind of the calendar of what's necessary for the election and put that out and all the deadlines for that. Melissa put out the the deadlines for town meeting. So now council's office is now also trying to figure out all the deadlines for the questions of the ballot. So there's 3 different schemes, but it's only one calendar. So we got to put all those kind of deadlines together to figure out what we're doing both for the election, questions, and town meeting in the next couple of months.
Miriam had a follow-up comment.
Yeah, so I actually agree with what Bernard said. I think it needs to be tightened up. I want to make sure, as it sounds like the rest of the select board does, that this really is only available to equity applicants. And again, as I recall, we had the same criticism the first time around, and then the warrant article failed. For extra licenses, the warrant article failed at town meeting, and I think we never returned to tighten the language up. So I think that's a good call. I think we do need to do that. I don't want to see anybody kind of taking advantage of some sort of back end into this. So I agree with you, Bernard.
Bernard, and then Mike.
Yeah, just one question. Maybe I misunderstood what John was saying, but I take it that we do not have the option of not putting it on the ballot. Is that correct?
You have that option. The question is,
we have that option.
Would you make that choice?
Yeah.
You are in ultimate control of what goes on the ballot, but town meeting has asked you to put it on there.
I would strongly encourage this board to follow what town meeting would like.
Yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
So Mike.
So thanks. I do want to point out to people who are supportive of putting a cap on that with this policy passing, where we're saying that only a social equity applicant will have standing for an additional license. Putting a cap on will basically make it very unlikely that we have a social equity operator in the foreseeable future, because the only way that one could get in would be either to buy into an existing business or to have one of them give up their licenses.
Retail.
Yes, quite. Retail licenses. Thank you.
Bernard, your hand is still up, or did you
No, I
want
put
to
it up
make?
again.
Okay.
No, I agree that that is a problem here, and that's why, you know, we should really focus on getting the existing businesses to both make sure their staffing is up to par, which I don't think is a problem, but that they are pressed to expand the ownership base of their companies.
So there are a couple of things that I'd like to add to this conversation. Yeah, my first year, or maybe my second year on the board, we were starting to tackle this question, after the state ballot passed about legalizing cannabis. And from what I recall, because it's getting really hard to keep track of, everything that happens over 5-6 years, is that we were advised that first come, first serve was probably our best legal strategy to not get sued. So that's what we adopted quickly. We also were told that the CCC was going to be a partner in this and evaluating applications, and the turnaround time was going to be only 90 days. And so we had to hurry to get everything set up. 5 years later, there's a lot that I would do differently. And I think because we haven't yet experienced it yet, we haven't had turnover in the marijuana retailer licensees, but it's coming. It is coming. So regardless of whether or not you want an additional retailer or not, we need to have policies set up for when vacancies become a reality. And so I'm comfortable, having this policy tweaked at CMAQ. But I think it was very important to have this conversation so that we all know what we're talking about. There was a lot of confusing statements in public comment, and this board is the licensing authority in town. And it requires the 5 of us to discuss this in public, to then direct our staff as to what we want to see as a collective. We owe that to the public. That's a democratic process. So I am really grateful for this discussion. I'm hoping that staff will work with the CMAQ committee, and we will revisit this, hopefully not 6 months from now. I would also just like to add that, I spoke to Alok over the weekend. We had a friendly disagreement. He is very respectful, and I really appreciate that. So I'll leave it up to Mike Salmon as to whether or not he thinks that it's worthwhile getting that committee's input as well. Any further comment on this? It seems as though we are not ready to take a vote here tonight. Chaz, do you want to say something?
Nope, just nodding. That's great. We will take it back.
Excellent. So the last piece of our agenda, our business tonight, is to replace me on the Housing Advisory Board with Bernard. So I'm recommending Bernard be our select board liaison to the Housing Advisory Board, and to hopefully take effect immediately. Any discussion before Bernard?
Yes, if anyone's worried, I did talk to Roger Blood and he agrees.
I really appreciate this, Bernard. HAB has been one of the most important contributions that I've been part of. I really enjoy the work that they do and having been part of that. So I really appreciate that you're going to represent us with that important body. Okay. Oh, Miriam?
Yeah, thank you for Bernard for taking it on. That's all I have to say.
John?
I was going to say the exact same thing, but I will also say thank you to Heather. So we lost a really good member of HAB, but we're getting a really good member of HAB.
Thank you.
And enough flattery of my colleagues on the board.
Bernard, did you have?
Well, I just wanted to add some flattery.
Oh yeah, that's good too.
I just want to add to the flattery. The select board's role on HAB began with Heather's involvement, and she laid the foundation for us having real and good input into that process. So thank you.
Of course, working with Roger is a real pleasure. Okay.
Even when you disagree with them.
Even when you disagree with them. So all those in favor of Bernard Green being the liaison to the Housing Advisory Board for the Select Board, please say aye. Bernard?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Miriam?
Aye.
Mike?
Oh, okay.
And the chair
Enthusiastically.
the chair votes aye. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move adjournment.
Okay.
This does not feel right to me.
I know.
It feels
Well,
wonderful. I still.
Don't worry, next week will be action-packed.
yes,
in-
and
are-
February and March
And
and
March.
April.
Really, yeah, don't get
We're
used to
in
it.
person next week, right?
We are in person next week.
Yay.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's my last meeting.
I was hoping you wouldn't bring that up. Oh, we don't like to think about that.
I hope there's cake.
Well, is that
And
clear
none of that
enough?
marble crap.
I'm not in charge of the cake.
Who's going to supply peanut butter cups to the select board meetings?
I know. I know.
Not
Okay.
it.
Okay, you raise your hand.
No, that's not it. Not it.
No, not it. Okay.
Maybe they will magically appear.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
it
have a
seems
good.
to me you should leave us with a sufficient supply for the rest of the your term.
I will take that under advisement. Have a good evening.